Okay, let's talk about the fear of failure because this is a big one that causes a lot of problems. So, consequences, you're a loser, right? You get cut by the team, you can get benched, you can lose your chance that maybe getting promoted or getting a scholarship or whatever it is. When we have things, we have goals, and we have things that we want from our sport, it's really hard to separate ourselves from that desire, right? I know that at every stage of my career, I wanted to either be promoted, I wanted to earn more playing time, I wanted to get my pro contract. When I got my pro contract and I was a professional ball player, I wanted to stay on that team. I knew if I didn't play well, I'd lose that. They'd cut me, they'd get rid of me, and that'd be that, right? So there's always that trophy that we want, whether it's a physical trophy or just something else that we're trying to get or keep when we're playing. And it's really hard to separate from that. So obviously consequences are always there, but the best players, they learn to distance themselves and detach from those consequences so they don't inhibit them and clutter their mind up with fear. So obviously the consequences are always going to be there, and the better you get at your sport, the more those consequences are going to be there. They're not going away. You just have to learn to deal with them, and we deal with them in part by being present. So we talked about having a fluid mind and just being so focused on the task at hand that we don't have any room to think about other stuff, but also just by detaching ourselves from those consequences. And when there's high risk, high reward, and there's a crowd, and there's, again, the game's on the line, and there's high stakes, whether it's for the team or for you or for both, it's just really tough to do that. So our goal is to play like you're in your backyard, and it's a combination of factors, right? This is the ultimate goal, to be, in the World Series and not mentally feeling the pressure and the pull of the World Series, right? Or to be in the World Cup or to be in the Olympics, whatever it is. We want to be on that big stage while feeling like we're in our backyard, right? That's the goal. So how do you act like the pressure doesn't get to you? Number one, experience. So there's a reason, like in baseball, there's the minor leagues, and you play on progressively bigger stadiums as you go. Like in AAA, there's like the biggest crowds, and 6,000 to 15,000 people, and then you jump up to the big leagues where there might be 50,000 people there. But you start out low, and you continue to get used to it, and you start to habituate to it. Intense focus when there's no gap, when there's no time gap between the play and your decision to act. That's our big goal. We don't want to have this gap where like you're lining up for the kick and you have a chance to think about missing the kick, right? Eliminating that time gap as best we can is important. And when we really focus on the task, we don't let that time affect us. We don't give that cracks for all that negativity to come in. Positivity, so positive self-talk, visualization, seeing yourself do well, telling yourself that you can do it, that you can succeed. All that stuff helps insulate you from the negatives, the doubts, and the anxiety that want to flow in when the game's on the line. Because when you're like, oh my God, how can I do this with all these people watching me? I'm going to be humiliated if I miss this kick, miss this shot, strike out, whatever it is. If you start looking around how big the stadium is, it gets crazy. So we want to talk to ourselves in a positive, confident way and visualize ourselves doing the task the way we know how to do it. And then meditation on failure. This is an interesting sort of counterintuitive idea that the Warriors would do, and we'll talk more about this in depth in its own little lecture. But the Samurai Warriors back in the day, they would go out with their sword in a battle, and they knew that they might die. And if they weren't as good as they could possibly be with the sword, they would lose to their opponent. It was very much just like in a sport where you're, in a foot race against someone else, your best versus his best. Well, in samurai culture, your best, if it was better than his, you lived and he died, right? And so they couldn't be afraid of their own death. And so what they would do is they would sit down, they would meditate, and they would visualize themselves being killed in lots of different ways in battle. So it was almost like they became familiar and comfortable with it, and they didn't fear it anymore. They wanted to have experienced it so many times that if they felt like they were close to it in battle or they were nervous, like, it's no big deal. Like, I've done that before. I know what it's going to be like. I'm not afraid. And then they could stay relaxed, and then they could just react to the sword, and it gave them a better chance of staying alive and living through a tough day of combat. So We're going to talk about that a little bit and how that might apply for you as an athlete as well. But in general, the fear of failure really cripples players, and you can see it in all forms of little league sports. And it gets hard to see when you get up and you get higher, but you can still see it if you know what to look for. Where players you can see that they're thinking about what might happen if they don't succeed, and it can really cripple you, and it can ruin again the muscle memory and the amazing quality of practice that you've dedicated yourself to. It can all just go downhill if you're on the field and you're afraid of losing. We've got to play to win, and we can't play with fear.